Welcome to the Forward Ever podcast, where we highlight African immigrant leaders in New York and make visible the interest of Africans in New York's immigrant community. My name is Yata Kizolu, and you're hearing the sounds of Yakuba Sissoko. In this episode, Deacon Solomon Kibriye shares the story of fleeing Ethiopia and creating a life in New York City, how he got involved in the church, and how his love for history has influenced his recent projects.
Hello everyone, my name's Amrita Khan, and today is March 23rd, 6:14 p.m. And today we have a special guest. I'll have him introduce himself to the audience right now.
My name is Deacon Solomon Kibriye, and I'm originally from Ethiopia, and I'm a New Yorker now.
Well, nice to meet you. Thank you for being here today. So let's just get straight into the questions. So we're going to start off from when and where were you born?
So I was born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in 1968, and I grew up there, and I lived there for the first 13 years of my life.
Can you tell us a bit about your childhood in Ethiopia?
Okay, well, I was born, my father was a jeweler, and my mother worked for the UNDP by the time I left. She worked at other jobs before then, so I had two working parents. We were fairly well-to-do. We had, I went to a private school there. I went to a school that was British-run. So when I arrived in the U.S., I had a pretty heavy British accent, which I lost in 1 year because I was so young. But as a child, my parents were very religious and were very involved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. We attended services at Holy Trinity Cathedral, which is the big cathedral in Addis Ababa. As a young boy, it's very traditional in Ethiopia for young boys to receive church education along with their secular education. So I was trained with Holy Liturgy and Bible stories and dogma and so on. At a very young age, I was ordained as a deacon, and I began to serve at the cathedral. Other than that, I lived a pretty typical life. We went swimming, we visited friends, we went to school, we participated in school sports. I did a lot of reading, and, we had our friends and pretty normal life. But at the same time, in the background, Ethiopia was going through a rather difficult revolution. In 1974, the monarchy fell. Emperor Haile Selassie was deposed, and a Marxist government, military-led Marxist government, took over. There was a lot of civil strife. There were massacres, civil wars, and famines, foreign wars that happened, and there was a lot of upheaval, and a lot of people killed, and many others fled. And my brother and I were very young when we came here. But at that time, because of all the wars and the civil strife going on, they were conscripting very young children into the military based just on your height. So if you were tall enough, they would send you to war. And my brother and I were tall, so our parent got us out of there and brought us here.
Was there anything particular about New York City that influenced your family to come to New York?
Well, initially, my brother and I were brought here, and we stayed with family. So I had an aunt who, very long ago in the 60s, married an American serviceman while she was in school in Germany and had moved here. So we went to live with her and her family in southern New Jersey. I came up to New York in 1985 when I finished high school. I was initially at City College here in Manhattan. That's when I moved to New York. I had family here as well. I had aunts and cousins who lived here.
Yeah, so there was already sort of like a community that you could come to in New York.
Yes. So Ethiopians began moving here, I would say, in the 70s, right about the time that the revolution happened. And so I already had a bit of a support network here. There were Ethiopians here, and there were family members here.
I'm not sure if you would remember this, but did you have any type of expectations of New York when you were coming here?
As a child, I imagined when I thought of New York, I thought of skyscrapers and the Statue of Liberty, and I imagined the Empire State Building and the Twin Towers. But when you come here, it's a bit different. When I moved here in 85, it was very different from what it is now. the subways were filthy, and the streets weren't as clean as they were, and there was a lot of abandoned housing in many parts of the city, and it was the very height of what was known then as the war on drugs. New York was a very different place. When I first moved to New York City, I lived on the west side on 80th Street between Amsterdam and Columbus. And back then, it's just a block away from the Museum of Natural History, but it was very seedy. It was very, very seedy. But at the same time, there was a lot about New York that was so much fun and so interesting. You saw all sorts of characters on the street, and a very good way of picturing how it was is actually to look at scenes from the subway in movies. Coming to America comes to mind, where they really portrayed the subways very well in there. People um, imagine, the west side or the east side of Manhattan today as being a certain way, but back then it was very different. They were much smaller, and
With your migrations, do you feel like you've had any challenges, and sort of like how did you overcome that?
I think one of the big challenges, and I think this is true for any immigrant, um, is the homesickness and the feeling of being disconnected from, your community, from your original community. My brother and I came initially without our parents, so that was difficult. But it was wonderful that being in New York, we did have a little bit more of a community, because there are other Ethiopians here, and in particular the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, where I went to serve and continue to serve at. Really built a family of people that we are connected with, and it's been long term. So I've been serving at that church since 1985. So babies that I had helped baptize at that church are now coming back with their own babies to baptize, which is a little surreal for me, but it's exciting. It gives you a feeling of family with these people. You've known them in their entire life, and see weddings and funerals and all these things that build ties among people. Um, Restaurants, Ethiopian restaurants, being able to go out and have your food and introduce your food to your new friends here, your American friends. It's really wonderful. And I think what's really great about New York is you can experience other cultures here as well, authentically, which I also love about New York.
So, speaking of New York, could you tell us about your day in your current COVID life?
Day in the COVID life. So sadly, it's mostly, I'll get up and I will turn on my computer and start working. And I'll sit there and work and go on, Zoom calls and Microsoft Teams calls, and then meals in between, and then to bed. Sadly, I work for a financial institution in their legal department, so I do go in twice a week, 3 times a week on average. But when I go there, there's nobody else there. It's usually just me in the office and maybe one other person on the entire floor, and then pretty much the same. The only difference is I'll be commuting in and out. And then on weekends, mostly Sunday is our church is open for services, but very restricted. And we have two priests that go in to conduct services. I do not go in on Sundays, but what I do is I help with running the Zoom broadcast and the Facebook broadcast of church services every Sunday, and then I teach the little kids Sunday school on Sunday afternoon over Zoom as well.
So, what are some of the challenges or benefits that has arisen from going virtual?
It has its pluses and its minuses. The whole point of the church service is togetherness and bringing people together. And this is kind of separated, Corona has kind of separated us and caused a distance. So there is that loss of community and being able to see each other and and fellowship with each other. But in other ways, it's been a plus. Particularly broadcasting the service over Facebook a lot more people from all over the world, and people who maybe didn't have the opportunity for health reasons or other reasons, work or whatever, that weren't able to come to church every Sunday are now able to participate and watch and be a part of the service. And so that's definitely a plus. Um, and the reach has increased. People in Italy are watching. People in Canada are watching our church, and it, 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 that's definitely a plus. But that being said, when you're a sacramental church like the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, where taking communion is important, and participating in the actual service in the place is important. That's definitely a disadvantage of doing it electronically. But it's better than not having the service. Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag.
Is there like anything that you guys have been doing to like increase the community, or like things that you were thinking about engaging in maybe to make it feel more like a community?
We do have a Zoom room, and people can participate that way, or the Facebook, and we try to make announcements through there. There are other community organizations, Ethiopian community organizations, that have been, there's a mutual assistance association, which is, it's called an IDDR, and I'm on the board for the New York one, or the larger one in New York. It's basically an organization where all the members pay an annual fee, and when anybody dies in the community, or that's a member of the IDDR, we each chip in a set amount of money, it's usually like $50, and then the IDDR as a group will give a bulk amount to the bereaved family to help with funeral expenses. It's a very cultural thing. It happens in Ethiopia as well. But we've been set up here as a nonprofit, and we need to conduct elections and have board members, etc. And we were able to actually move that online, so that we have online elections, and we've just conducted our first annual meeting of all the membership online via Zoom, and it's been a huge advantage. First off, having electronic elections, we don't actually have to have somebody sitting there counting the votes, which is horrible and tedious when you have 600 members, and it's all done electronically. And when you have a meeting, you don't have to worry about catering it and renting a hall and all this. So it saved on expenses, it saved on time. It just ran very smoothly. So there are advantages like that, which are good. But again, people like to see each other. People like to catch up with one another, and the whole sense of community is built on personal connection, which is a little harder to do electronically.
I had a question about, are there any current projects you're working on at the moment, community wise, or anything related to who you are, that you'd like to share?
Just been made a board member of a not-for-profit group that was set up. I want to say that was last winter, which was not this winter, but the previous winter, before the whole pandemic. Um, it's the Friends of Emperor Haile Selassie Memorial Association. So Emperor Haile Selassie is the last emperor of Ethiopia, and a group. There's a foundation that was founded in Ethiopia to further his aims of getting quality education for all Ethiopians. And this was a big part of his life. When he first became emperor, he actually also was Minister of Education. There was Minister of Defense and Minister of Foreign Affairs and all these other big, powerful ministries that he appointed other people to, but he himself ran the Ministry of Education because of how important he thought education was. And so some of us, Ethiopians living abroad, specifically in the United States, have set up a foundation here to support this foundation in Ethiopia by raising funds and holding events to raise awareness, and to help, you know, impoverished Ethiopians, people who may have difficulty meeting their educational goals, to help them financially so that they can go to school, so they don't have to worry about their rent and their clothing and their food. And we were getting off the ground, and we were planning events, you know, charity events that where we would invite people and get people to donate and so on. And then the pandemic happened, and then having events just became, you know, impossible. But you know, we've been planning, and we've been building a website, and we haven't just stopped. We have sat still, but we're building a website and a donation system so that people can donate people money online, and it'll help disadvantaged people in Ethiopia. And been, it's been very rewarding seeing it come along. We've had to take a different path than what we thought initially we would be doing, but I think as we emerge from this situation, we'll get back on track. And you know, that's one thing I've been working on. And then of course there's church, and hopefully, you know, as people become vaccinated and start coming back to church, uh, we will get more on track with that as well. I'll be able to go in person. Um, and one of the things is, another thing is also trying to get people to take the vaccine. There's a lot of reluctance in many communities, and in our community as well. There are all sorts of stories about what the vaccine is and what it does, and people, you know, just you know, are scared of something new and unfamiliar. Um, so we've been trying to encourage people to do that as well.
Just thinking about everything you said and you've shared with me thus far, I guess like I'm curious to find out, how did you get involved in these things, and sort of what kind of influenced you to like be a part of these projects?
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I am a deacon in the church, and so I'm someone that's familiar to many New York Ethiopians. So they've seen me, you know, at church, and they've seen me in a prominent role at church. So you know, I get asked a lot to do things, whether it's, you know, I got nominated to be on the board of the that it wasn't something I really sought out, but you know, there you go. I also write a lot on social media. I'm on Facebook, and I write on historic topics, particularly to do with Ethiopia. And I didn't really plan on it becoming something big, but I kind of developed a bit of a following, and you know, I got asked to do a lot of things because people learned about me and what, you know, they found what I was writing to be interesting. So I think that has a big role in pushing me forward into these projects.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious to hear like what are some of the topics that you engage in. And
Yeah, I write a lot about Ethiopian history. Ethiopia is one of the oldest countries in continuous existence. I think maybe China and Egypt are countries that have existed longer, but very few others. The Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, you know, which is a biblical story. The Ethiopian Kibriye mentions that the Queen of Sheba, who we call Makeda, came back pregnant with Solomon's child, and that child, Menelik the First, founded the royal dynasty in Ethiopia, and they have, you know, they reigned in Ethiopia with very few interruptions from, you know, from biblical times until 1974. It's the oldest, I think, along with the imperial family of Japan, it's the oldest royal line in the world. The two oldest royal lines are Ethiopia and Japan. So Ethiopia has a lot of history, and it's also the country that, you know, it was one of the first Christian countries. Christianity came to Ethiopia way before it came to most places in Europe. Um, you know, in the fourth century, the 300s, and it was one of the first countries to welcome Muslims, Muslims who were fleeing persecution in Arabia during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, fled to Ethiopia and were protected there, which, and the Prophet Muhammad specifically exempted Ethiopia from jihad. So there's a lot of history, there's a lot to write about, and a lot of cultural things, a lot of historical things. And I think people love stories. People, we grow up with fairy tales, and we love stories.
Yeah. Is there a specific way that people can find you online?
They can come to my Facebook page, Solomon Kibriye, Kibriye. I'm the only one, um, so I should be easy to find. Um, I'm also um, in the beginning stages of setting up a podcast. I It's not launched yet. I came up with a name, and then somebody else released an Ethiopian history podcast with a very similar name to the one I was going to think. So I'm still up in the air about the about the name. Um, but I will be podcasting soon. It will be a podcast and video cast because people love pictures. So I will try to put up, images as well.
Yeah. Do you have you like personally like reached reached into like history or like a specific time or person for like motivation during this time or like any time?
Yeah, um, you know, I think the pandemic is one. Thinking back to the horror of the influenza epidemics in the beginning, 1917, 18. It was very bad in Ethiopia as well. They call it the Hidar Bashata, which is the November plague. That's what it means, because it reached its climax in that month in 1918 in Ethiopia. There are accounts of people in the cities of the big towns in Ethiopia being so afraid of what was happening, with all these people dying, that they went and fled and hid in the woods because they figured it was something in the cities, population centers, that was causing people to die, and people would hide in the woods to keep away from the contagion. So, we see how people got through that, as devastating as that pandemic was. The world got through that, and it kind of gives you hope for the present situation. And then, in Ethiopia, we're going through some pretty bad ethnic problems now. There's a lot of ethnic division. There's lots of clashes. There are elections coming up in June, and things seem to be getting a little worse ahead of the elections. Um, but you look back into Ethiopian history, and although it wasn't ethnic at the time, there was a period called the Zaman Mesafint, the Age of the Princes, where regional warlords had become very powerful and were all fighting for against each other, um, for power and influence. And the central government and the monarch were very weak, and the regional uh, warlords were all fighting each other. So it was a time of division, and it was very unsettled. But we emerged from that, and the Ethiopians were able to come together across regions, across ethnicities, across religion, to actually achieve the fact that we were the only country in Africa not to be colonized. Uh, we were able to fight off attempts at colonization, because we were able to unite. And I feel like we can get back to that sense of unity and togetherness again, because we've done it before. They say history repeats itself, um, and it sort of does. We try to learn, but it does repeat itself, I think. Um, so that gives me hope too. So history actually gives me hope, and that's probably one of the reasons I like it so much. It gives me hope. It gives me uh, kind of a blueprint. I can say, okay, if this worked this way in the past, maybe it can work again in some form. Um, and I kind of weave that into my writing a little bit, which is why maybe some people uh, like to come and read what I have to say. but yeah, definitely, I think history is very important in helping us deal with what we are living through today.
Yeah, I know, like I actually like found that out like not too long ago that Ethiopia wasn't colonized, and I was just like thinking about that, and I was just like, wow. And I feel like it's like such a unique history.
There are some advantages that countries that were colonized got from being colonized. You know, they have better infrastructure, they have bigger cities, and, you know, they have road networks and factories and things like that that the colonizers built and left behind. And Ethiopia, of course, not having been colonized, doesn't have those advantages. So we end up being maybe a little poorer materially. Um, but the mindset of never having been colonized is so valuable. And I think Ethiopians don't really realize, or they take it for granted. You know, I came here to the US not really being aware of the racial feelings that are in this society. As a black or brown person here, if people that were born here and grew up here have an experience that I didn't have when I first came. I actually had to experience racism for me to be able to relate to what it is to be discriminated against. Because, you know, if I went into a store back then and I was followed around the store, I wouldn't imagine, it wouldn't occur to me that he was, you know, the person following me was following me because I appeared a certain way, because I was a person of color. Um, to me, it would just be, oh, he's just following me around the store for some reason. It just wouldn't occur to me. Um, but now, of course, having lived here, I'm aware. So in a way, we were very lucky in not having been oppressed racially or culturally, um, so that we don't have that experience. So we're very lucky in that, I think, and I think a lot of Ethiopians take it for granted.
The point you brought up about like not being aware of like your racial like identity and like what that meant in New York is so interesting. And kind of like, did you know like I guess like how did you come to like understand that identity and what it means in the space that you're now in, and sort of like what sort of like how did you handle those challenges, how did you overcome them?
It was a gradual process. So I remember, um, you know, I went to a Catholic school, when I was in high school in New Jersey, and I had to be, you know, it was a regional Catholic school, so it wasn't close to where I lived. So they would bus all the kids in our area, mostly Catholics, to the school. And I was the only person of color on my school bus, the only one. It was a full bus, so it was mostly, you know, Italian and Irish kids. You know, it was southern New Jersey, so we didn't really have a large Latino population back then in that part of the country. So there were very few black people in the entire school. But on that particular school bus, I was the only one. And you know, we're kids. I made friends like anybody else, and you know, they were very nice to me and good to me. But the bus went through a largely black community. There was one particular community that was largely black, and we went through that community, and I wasn't aware of these tensions. You know, I went to a mostly white school, but we were being bused through a black neighborhood, and the tensions between our high school and their high school were very high. So our basketball team went to play them, and apparently there were incidents. I'm not clear as to what exactly, but they had to leave, so they had to bring them back to our school. So when we were going through this town, um, the kids on my bus a bunch of them had brought bananas, and they opened the windows and threw bananas at the public school kids walking down the street, and they were all black. They all threw bananas at them, which was terrible. You know, but I didn't understand. I didn't understand what was going on. I'm the black kid on the largely white bus, but they all threw bananas, and then this was, I think, the next day or a couple of days later. Those kids waited for us on the side of the road with eggs, and they pelted our bus with eggs. Um, so it's stupid, but there was a racial element to it, and the choice of a banana and the dehumanizing and so on. It was directed at these Black American kids, um, and so the N word came up on the bus, and I'm there, and that started a conflict on my school bus, which I wasn't directly involved in. One of one of the other kids on the bus reprimanded the person who used the N word and said, "How dare you say that in front of Solomon? That's a horrible word to use in front of Solomon." Not that it was a horrible word, but it was horrible to say it in front of me because that's just rude. If I weren't there, it would be fine to say. And then the person who was yelled at for that yelled back saying, "Well, Solomon isn't an N word." And then they got into a whole thing about it. No, 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 Solomon isn't. He's one of us. He's good. He's smart, and he's our friend. And you know, um, so and then the other person was like, "Well, it's still rude." So it wasn't. Um, they weren't against the use of the word. They just didn't want people to be rude to me because I was their friend. Um, and then that's when it began to occur to me that no, that the issue here is that the word is a bad word, and that's the ideas behind that word, and the fact that you have classed this entire group of people that you don't know. They're just walking down the street. They just happen to be a certain color. That you've identified them with this negative term. That's what's wrong. That's when I guess it began to occur to me, just how horrible this was. But for them, for my friends on the bus, it was just a question of, oh, Solomon is a certain color, but that doesn't make him what we perceive everybody else out there to be that are the same color as him. They also said, he's not from here, he's Ethiopian, so that makes him different. I think that us versus them type of mentality, I had been kind of accepted from that because A, I was an immigrant, and B, I spoke differently than most what they perceived a Black American should speak, would speak like. But I realized that just wasn't valid. There was really no difference between me and those kids that were walking down the street. I could, and I've experienced anti-immigrant feelings from other Black people. Um, oh, you're not really Black. You're African, and Ethiopians don't really think that you're Black anyway. And so there's the immigrant experience, and there's the experience as a person of color, which is, it's interesting. But I think you experience it as you experience it in life. That's right. They actually the conversation on the bus degenerated to the point where they decided they were going to fight after school in the park. These two people, over this. One side said, "Well, no, Solomon's not an N word, so I can use that word in front of him if I want to because he's not that." And the other person was like, "No, that's rude, and you shouldn't use that word in front of Solomon."
I feel like that experience brought up a lot, and I guess like how have you processed all of this, and what kind of have you done since like encountering these things? Or like, I think also to think about something I was thinking about, is kind of, like you were in these white spaces. Was like the church a place, or was there some other place where you felt you weren't just like in a white space? And like, were you sharing these experiences with other friends? things to think about, answer, whichever.
My school was almost entirely white. There were very few black kids. So, and I was a fairly kind of nerdy slash popular kid. So, um, I had a lot of friends, but I kind of hung out with with the nerdy group. So, it was fine. I didn't really experience um, difficulty in that setting, but I was aware of being different and there being this color divide. But moving to New York and going to City College opened my eyes a lot more to differences in race. I was living here in New York when the Central Park Five thing happened, which was terrible, terrible. A woman got raped in the park, and some black kids got accused, and you know certain people who subsequently attained very high office in this country were actually demanding that they be put to death. It was a terrible time, and I was also here in New York when Amadou Diallo, Senegalese, um, I believe he was Senegalese, immigrant, hardworking street vendor, supposedly very nice guy, got shot 41 times by the police in the doorway when he was, clearly not armed. Just, you know, life in New York teaches you about these things, and you learn. Life in New York was an education. My church activity was a refuge from life in New York, life in America. It was like being back in an idealized Ethiopia, where everyone is there, everyone's praying, everyone's enjoying the culture, and they're praying the same way. And we go and we eat afterwards, and we hang out and we speak in Amharic. And I think Ethiopian community kind of insulates you a little bit because we are immigrants and we do kind of protect ourselves a little bit from that, but we're all very aware when we go into a bank and ask for a loan, um, they're not going to say, well, you know, he may be an immigrant, so maybe he might be a little different. I don't think it works that way. I think people look at you and think, okay, they think color, they think language, they think, culture. There are things that you broadcast that are picked up on by others, and people judge you.
I feel like you answered this a bit. How have you, like, are there any specific strategies or like ways you've like overcome just the encounters that you've had, or sort of like,
Yeah, I think because of what we were just talking about people judging people a certain way, I am careful to dress a certain way and speak a certain way and look a certain way, because people do judge you almost immediately upon seeing you. So I want to make sure that I look tidy and I speak well. I actually was told once, oh, you're different because you're articulate. No, I'm not different because of that, but I'm glad that I'm coming across that way because of that, because it's going to help me in life. But yeah, you have to be conscious of how you speak, the words you use, the way you dress, everything.
yeah, how do you think you manage and like balance those two identities and without losing one or the like other?
It's hard, but I think I categorize my life a little bit. So, I have my weekend with church and my outside organizations and so on, which is one set of my life, and then my home life with my family, which is another category where I can have the Ethiopian interaction, and then my professional life, my 9 to 5 life, where I'm around almost completely non-Ethiopians. Um, that is, you know, that provides a balance. So I can switch one off and one on.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's necessary to navigate it that way, for sure. Yeah, I'm like trying to be cognizant of your time as well. So I'm gonna, yeah, I'm gonna move forward and kind of go into like the next section that I have, which is already started talking about like projects you're working on in the future. And I guess I had this question about like, what is something you're most concerned about for the future right now? And that could be like the church, of any of these projects, of just the current state of the pandemic, of immigrants right now. And
That's a good question. There's a lot to be concerned about. The whole situation for immigrants, not just in this country, but in the West generally, I think is very concerning. I think there's a big rise in nationalism. I hate to say it, but neo-fascism, which is frightening. And considering that, very early in my life, I had to flee as, a 13-year-old, I had to flee, far left oppression and fear of what that can do. And now, the far right is rising up on this side. It's a little terrifying. It's very concerning. What do you do? What do you do when you fled one horror and you're faced with another in the span of your life?
yeah, and I feel like given all that, like, are there things that you are hopeful for the future?
I think people like you, young people, give me hope. I think young people today are much more open than they were in the past. Of course, every generation says that. Every generation says, "Oh, my generation is much more open than the previous generation." But then, you become old fogies like me, and then um, you find yourself being a little less open. But I really think that young people today are a lot more open and a lot more tolerant and a lot more understanding of differences. And I think all the strife and difficulties we see around us today are kind of a last gasp of of the way things were. And I think it's changing. Um, I think America and the world is a lot more diverse and colorful than it used to be, and I think that's a good thing. So I am hopeful. I am hopeful, and I'm hopeful about the pandemic too. I think it'll get under control, and life will return to some semblance of what it was before. But we'll see. We'll see. I am hopeful.
Thank you so much for your time and sharing your stories with us today.
Thank you. It's an opportunity for me to blab. I enjoy talking, as you probably tell. So thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Forward Ever podcast, a collaboration between African Communities Together and Barnard College. To learn more about African Communities Together and the many ways you can support our mission, visit our website at africans.us or follow us on social media. Our social media handle on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter is AfricansUS. Like, comment, and share. Forward ever, backwards never.
Who are we?